All right. The stream has begun. Hello, Galactic Blueprints. Today we're going to be discussing Saturn in the third house like it is written. I'm not too sure how long or short the stream could be. The stream could easily be 20 minutes. This stream could easily be 1 hour. We'll just have to go with the flow. Right now where I'm from, there's a bit of a rain coming. And a lot of times in this area, when it starts raining really, really heavily, the lights go off a little bit. So who knows, maybe our stream might be cut short because of the rain. Hello, Lola. All right then, listen, let me just begin reading my first paragraph on Saturn the third, and we'll just see where this goes and see people coming in. Hi, Captain Thor. Let us go all the way up here. So, to get a few basics out of the way, I think that's the kitchen making noise. There's somebody in the kitchen. To get a few of the basics out of the way, since Saturn is the planet that negates all things, someone with Saturn the third could first and foremost have had no siblings, could first of all not have had any siblings, or they could have only have had siblings after the age of 28. And one day when we come to discuss the Saturn return, one day we're going to make a video about Saturn returns and what those mean. We're going to explore the reasons why after the age of 28 things could be different. So one visual image to keep of Saturn in the third, not second, the third house is of a magnifying glass. And this is because Saturn is the greater malefic, the planet that reduces size, makes things smaller, and observes things very, very closely. It's 2 a.m. in India, and the Galactic Blueprint woke up just for my live. To be fair, this is the latest that I've ever done any live. I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lives now. So yeah, but thank you so much for sacrificing your sleep to be here. Thank you very, very, very much. Let us continue. Let us now continue. And by the way, you guys, remember, any questions or anything like that, because these are always funner if they're interactive. That's the reason why I do these lives anyway. So, whereas I think you guys can hear the rain. Can you hear the rain? Can the microphone capture the rain? Whereas Saturn in the second could lower one's intelligence or IQ, as it suggests one with difficulty assimilating information and one who is not very cultural, Saturn in the third can make someone very intelligent, as it suggests one who is systematic in their thinking, someone who breaks complex concepts into small parts for easy understanding. So are you guys seeing this? Saturn having different effects in different houses. Saturn in the second house could actually make somebody dumber. Not all people with Saturn in the second, obviously, but Saturn in the second could actually lower somebody's intelligence, where Saturn in the third could actually increase somebody's intelligence. Saturn is the dark Tamasic planet, and it's also the planet of ignorance. The second house is a planet of knowledge, what you take in, what you consume. And so by Saturn, when Saturn sits in the second, it constricts that house. It restricts it. It makes it smaller, meaning that you consume less, and your ability to consume becomes less. And so Saturn in the second can make somebody less intelligent. But Saturn in the third, as we will continue reading, can actually increase somebody's intelligence, because the third has a lot to do with your thinking ability, your actual processing ability. All right then. Guys, don't forget to hit the like. Don't forget to hit the like. Like, subscribe, share. So, Saturn makes a person very scientific in this house. Saturn makes a planet very scientific in this house, as it desires to directly experience every abstract idea in order to then understand them. Like, for instance, if a Saturn in the third wanted to understand hedonism as a philosophy, he would want to directly study actual individuals living a hedonistic lifestyle and take notes as to and take notes as though he were a scientist in the wild. Alternatively, he may personally wish to become hedonistic for a time in his life, in order to develop an actual, tangible understanding of this practice. Saturn in the third naturally aspects the ninth house of one's philosophies, and so again, here philosophies and ideas in general are first to be studied objectively, first to be practiced, and then they are integrated. This is what makes these individuals so respected as far as knowledge and intelligence is concerned, because for everything that they say, they know what they're talking about. They are not the types to pretend to know something when actually they don't, and they can be slow to explain their explanations. They can be slow to explain. Their explanations are complete and also very simple. And they explain things in such a way that it allows another person to seemingly fully understand concepts that they're talking about, even without having actually experienced these concepts personally. So again, the Saturn in the third house person wants to experience these concepts personally and wants to study them scientifically and practically. And then when it translates this knowledge to another person, because they translate it in such a simple and easy to understand way, the other person to whom they're explaining these things to, they receive it in such a way that it feels as though they've almost experienced it themselves, even though they haven't actually experienced it. You see. And so yeah, Saturn in the third is very scientific. It can make somebody very, very scientific. Somebody who has Saturn in the third is not going to allow themselves to just go by assumptions. You know what I mean? There are many assumptions that people make in society, but somebody who has Saturn in the third wants to actually study those assumptions and really see whether or not they hold any water. So, would Saturn's aspect as well as Jupiter and Venus's aspect on the second decrease IQ? No, Jupiter and Venus, those are planets of knowledge. And so if the two planets of knowledge aren't a house of knowledge, it increases one's knowledge. But Saturn in the second decreases one's knowledge. Yeah. That is what it does. I keep on pressing this goal button, but nothing ever happens. I don't know what it's for. Capricorn ascendant and Saturn is in your third. Awesome. All right, let us go back. I feel like we're going very, very quickly. This stream may not last very, very long. Saturn in the third also aspects the 12th house, one of the most difficult houses to understand, which also suggests that these individuals wish to understand spirituality and the astral world in a tangible and direct way. And once again, they wish to make a science out of such experiences. Like, for example, a Saturn in the third individual would be interested in studying what really happens to an individual when they're having an ecstatic, mystical experience. They would read documents on the matter, or also they would actually try drugs themselves. Saturn in the third individuals tend to be very experimental. Again, trying drugs, trying to travel, trying to have adventures, because their thinking style is made very practical. Naturally, they are also great problem solvers, as they always break down large problems into small parts. When a Saturn in the third looks at a car, for example, instead of seeing it as a large ensemble, it sees it as a simple series of interconnected parts, and it wishes to understand those parts and how they come together. A child with Saturn in the third could be given a large, complex puzzle, and instead of contemplating its largeness, it instead studies it in small parts and proceeds to connect the tiny parts together until it arrives at the larger whole. All right then, back to the chat. I know someone with Saturn Cancer in the third who is very soft-spoken, practically skilled, intellectual, and shy, but is finding their voice little by little, becoming outspoken. Love that about Saturn, the planet that grows with time. Thank you, Mia YouTube. You can relate to all of this, even though Saturn's simply transiting your third. Okay, interesting. Where are we? Naturally, Saturn is the fault finder, and so these individuals make wonderful analysts that have the patience to study large documents or projects or concepts and can detect even the slightest errors. They can also become grammar Nazis, if you will, because they are very sensitive to errors and are critical even of speech. In fact, in general, they do not tolerate anything that is illogical or not ordered or organized, and it can be difficult to be around such individuals. And it can be difficult to be around such an individual who is always critiquing one's language and feels the need to correct one. So that is interesting because that also brings us into another reason as to why somebody who has Saturn in the third may not have a lot of friends, may not socialize much, because they may not always be very, very fun to be around, as it's not always a very fun thing to be around somebody who's always critiquing you, criticizing your ideas, etc., etc., always trying to expose the flaws and the biases in your ideas, because that is very much Saturn in the third behavior. But this is another reason why their intelligence can seem so impressive, because everything that seems complex to other people, the Saturn in the third native sees as a simple matter of parts. They may especially excel in mathematical disciplines. But now here's something else. Such a Saturn may struggle to multitask because Saturn itself is not a planet of activity as it is tamasic. And so these individuals can only do one task at a time, and they may even be the sort to lock themselves in their offices or in the library and to put their phones on mute as to not be disturbed by too many preoccupations. Though this placement can make a highly concentrated individual, their concentration can easily be disturbed because Saturn, especially when it is younger, is a planet of anxiety and instability. But Saturn is also the planet that grows stronger with time. So eventually, when they are older, they can possess minds that are so firm, no external disturbance could ever distract them. So again, they go from easily disturbed at a young age to not disturbed at all when older. Does she, Ariana Grande, have Saturn in the third house? Okay. Oh, I came outside. Okay. Thank you for this information. Mia YouTubes. Let me check Ariana Grande's chart really quickly. Now, I don't know much about singing, but I know that there's a lot of technique when we speak of singing, right? And so I think that Ariana Grande, besides having a beautiful voice and being a great vocalist, she is also a very technically proficient singer, right? And so Saturn in the third here would definitely make sense regarding that, regarding her process. All right, any more questions, any more contributions before you continue? You know, a part of me is actually thinking maybe I'll skip a few. Not skip. What I'm trying to say is maybe I can go about this whole thing a little bit randomly, as in, instead of doing Saturn in the fourth, I could do Mercury in the first, I could do Mars in the first, I could do Venus in the eighth, I could do Sun in the 12th. I could just do whatever inspires me, you know what I mean? That is part of what I feel like doing, but at the same time, I like to be organized. I do like to be organized, and so part of me does not want to do that. And then I also need to prepare myself because I'm going to be making a new video, a new nakshatra video, where I talk about nakshatras, like using references to like movie clips and things like that. I've collected clips I have basically a whole thing prepared for like Dhanishta, a whole thing prepared for Shatabisha, and a whole thing prepared for like Rohini. And so right now I'm like deciding, okay, which one of those three do I invest more in? Which one of those three am I going to take like the next 2 months to work on so I can release on YouTube? Is basically what I'm thinking. Okay, so Miguel is asking, is Saturn's third aspect similar to having Saturn in the third house? According to some astrologers, yes. Because it is said that 100% of Saturn's light goes into its third aspect, its seventh aspect, and its 10th aspect. And so some astrologers say that having Saturn's third aspect in the third house is almost like having Saturn in the third house. That's what some astrologers say. That's what some astrologers believe. The karaka of the third house is always Mars. The karaka of the third is always Mars. All right, let me continue here. Saturn is the self critiquing planet, and so in the third house, one questions one's own thinking very often. One questions one's own ideas, one questions one's own beliefs, one carefully breaks down one's own thinking method to make sure there is no biases hidden therein. This self critiquing aspect of Saturn in the third perfects their thinking and perfects their minds and therefore perfects their ideas. This is what is often called metacognition, which is thinking about thinking, getting to the root behind thinking. This Saturn is also very good for self awareness, since one is interested in understanding the way that one's own mind operates and the reasons behind why one does what one does. It can lead to great self knowledge and self understanding. This is also a position that can make one a natural psychologist because, since one becomes interested in the inner mechanisms of how people produce thoughts, ideas, which then becomes action, one can develop an understanding of the inner world and inner life of other people. The third house is the house of action, but since Saturn internalizes the action oriented nature of the third house, it becomes less capable of actual direct action and becomes more interested in the origin of action, which is thoughts. The third house is where we try to understand reality better, and Saturn here would try to understand reality by going down to the origin of all things, asking why until they arrive at the root of things. It would like at, what did I write here? It would look, that's what I meant to write here. It would look at the actions of one person and ask itself, why does that person act that way? And from the person's actions, they would consider the origins of those actions, which is thoughts. And then they would consider what pattern of thinking has led this person to act this way. Oof. Okay. Back to the chat. Saturn, but conjunct K2, oof, that's a different conversation. But some qualities would be exaggerated because both Saturn and K2 like to get to the root of things. And so actually that could make for a very highly intelligent person. What is your opinion of your cousin? Would you say that your cousin is highly intelligent, Galactic Blueprint? There are various nakshatras that bring supernatural things into one's life, but we're not talking about that right now, actually. Yeah, that's incorrect. Saturn in Gemini and Saturn the third, not the same thing. Not the same thing at all. Not the same thing at all. So, such a Saturn is good at unlearning things. Such a Saturn is good at unlearning things and in general deconstructing its way of thinking. And that is why this Saturn, which again also aspects the ninth house and so restricts that house, this is why this Saturn is difficult to indoctrinate, or rather impossible to indoctrinate. Indoctrination is not possible where one is always questioning oneself and questioning one's own beliefs and ideas sincerely. And so, such a one is hard to control and also hard to manipulate. Saturn is also an introverted planet that internalizes things. And so one's communication would be internalized, meaning that one would talk to oneself incessantly. One could talk to oneself as one is walking down the street, for example. One could have a loud murmur that could alarm others, as others would probably begin to doubt one's sanity. One's thinking becomes quite loud. Saturn may close whatever house it sits in, and so in the third house, for whatever reason, one struggles to relate to one's friends and siblings, which would force them to think too much or even think out loud. But this also adds to a high IQ because it is often said that geniuses tend to talk to themselves. So let me try to explain this part a little bit more deeply. We all know the concept of talking to yourself, right? Many people self-talk. Many people talk to themselves. You could be talking to yourself while you're at home, while you're reading, as you're daydreaming, etc. Now, talking to yourself has an advantage because a lot of times when you talk to yourself, you have the opportunity of hearing your own thoughts out loud. When your thoughts are in your mind, it's not the same thing. It does not give you the same opportunity to critique your ideas. When you write down your ideas or when you say your ideas out loud, when you speak to other people, when you speak to yourself, you really have the opportunity of really hearing your ideas. And then from that, you can really critique and really study your ideas. You know what I mean? Really investigate them. So that's one reason why Saturn in the third would talk to itself. Another reason why Saturn in the third would talk to itself is because where Saturn sits, it closes off that house, which means that since the third is the house of communication, instead of you talking to other people, because Saturn comes in and closes that house, you only talk to yourself. If you have Saturn in the third, you might have a difficult time relating to people. If you have Saturn in the third, you might, for whatever reason, have no friends. You might, for whatever reason, be a little bit lonely. And so that is another reason why you'd be forced to talk to yourself. So yeah. But again, that also contributes to high IQ because it is often said that many geniuses have higher IQs. This part over here, I use other words to express the ideas that I was just sharing right now. Back to the chat we go. It's interesting that you say that the experience is very similar for you, having K2 in the third. Some things will be similar only because both Saturn and K2 are malefics. Both Saturn and K2 share a Vahana, which is the vulture, which suggests that they're both good at getting to the root of things. They're both good at contemplating things very, very deeply. And they're both very good at contemplating things very, very deeply. Oh, Miguel, this is a question that would lead us down many, many different rabbit holes. But there are differences, yes. Yes, definitely, Mia. If you have Saturn in the 12th and you have Saturn, if one person has Saturn in the 12th and another person has Saturn in the 3rd, there are going to be some similarities. Why? Because the 12th house is the house of... The 12th house is not a practical house. It is a house that is very difficult to understand, right? And so if somebody has Saturn in the 12th house, everything that is spiritual, that person would want to understand in the most practical, most scientific way possible. Somebody who has Saturn in the 12th house, at a young age, they could be atheistic. At a young age, they could not believe in spiritual things and things like that because Saturn would be minimizing that house. Saturn would be causing that person to doubt those things. Saturn would be causing that person to move away from those things. Only with time would Saturn relax its bounds and would encourage that person to explore that house in the most practical way possible. And so somebody who has Saturn in the 12th could go from being the most ignorant person as to all things that are spiritual, but then with time, they could have the deepest understanding of spiritual things in a very practical way. And it can also be a very good position for an occultist because much of occultism is trying to make a science out of spirituality. You see what I mean? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I understand your question, serendipity, but the sign, the nakshatra, and the house that a planet is in, all those things matter. Yes, Miguel, it could definitely impact your hearing. Somebody who has Saturn in the third could definitely have bad hearing. Hearing in your right ear, but hearing in general as well. And yes, it could also mean that you do not have a lot of neighbors, literally, or you do not interact a lot with your neighbors. When you're trying to study a house, you have to look at the lord of that house, the karaka of the house, and the planets that are in that house. All of those things. Oh, your father has Saturn and Venus in the 12th. So that means that suggests that your father is very, very practical when it comes to spiritual things. Because Saturn would really want to practically experience those things, and then Venus would want to sensually experience those things. And so it could be that your father is the type of person that if they can't see it, if they can't feel it, if they can't test it, then it's not real. Your father only wants to cling to things that he can see, Venus, or that he can test, Saturn. Okay, this is very, very sad news. Saturn Ketu in the third, and your eardrum is damaged. Oof. Sucks to hear that. Were you born like in 1996, 1997? Are you that generation that has Saturn Ketu in Pisces, galactic blueprint? Anyway, I'm not interested in debating anybody. I don't debate people about spirituality. That never works out. Anyway, moving on. The third house is considered to be a house of courage as well, but Saturn here can make a coward. Someone who is afraid of going out into the world and operating there. Instead, it can make someone confined to the house and home. Such a position can also make one introverted, either uninterested in socializing with other people or somehow incapable of doing so. This is not a position of someone who enjoys adventures or who does well traveling long distances. So the third house is an action oriented house, but Saturn internalizes experiences. Saturn is not a planet that goes out and does things, it internalizes things. And so, yes, a lot of the times somebody who has Saturn the third could be cowardly, but if they work on it and if they get older, they can become much more courageous and they can become one of the most courageous people. And so it's very interesting how Saturn operates. Saturn goes through opposite extremes. It can either make you like the worst at that thing or the best at that thing. But it usually makes you the best at that thing only through effort and with time. So moving on. So again, Saturn is an internalizing planet. The third house is the house of action, but since Saturn comes in and internalizes these significations, a Saturn in the third native would actually not be action oriented. They would not be action oriented. Instead, they would spend more time thinking than doing. They tend to have either few hobbies or actually not have any hobbies at all, as Saturn here would limit one's actual dexterity. Saturn would limit one's dexterity. Even the few hobbies one may have, one may take a long time to become technically proficient in them. Although Saturn here could do great things to one's mental processing, although Saturn here could do great things to one's mental processing ability, it would not benefit the hands and fingers very much. All right, we came to the end of this 4-page document. Now I'm just waiting for any more questions you guys may have. This stream has been 30 minutes so far. I wouldn't want to end the stream just now. So I'm interested in what you guys may have to say. I'm not sure if your boyfriend would relate to this video if all he has is Saturn in Gemini. I'm not sure if he would relate to it. I'm not sure if it would be very useful for him, but you can send it to him. I'm not going to refuse somebody sending my videos over to somebody. That's not something that I'm going to do. Yes, Saturn in the third can definitely protect one from religious dogma because you're always thinking about things and you're always questioning the origin of things. Jupiter in the third, one of the reasons why Jupiter in the third is considered so bad is because Jupiter in the third makes a person very easily distracted. The person struggles to concentrate. Somebody who has Jupiter in the third house, they really struggle to concentrate. They have many hobbies. They have many interests, and they don't do a good enough job of really investigating every single idea of theirs. And really, yeah, Jupiter in the third is very all over the place. It is one of the reasons why it does very badly there. You think my voice is calming? I don't feel like my voice is very calming. But thank you anyway. If somebody has Saturn in multiple divisional charts, I would not say that it strengthens that Saturn. It simply strengthens the overall significations. It is said of the Navamsha that the Navamsha is the fruits of the D1. The D1 is the tree and the D9 is the fruits. And so the tree, if somebody has Saturn in the third and the D1, that person's tree is strong. And then when that person has Saturn in the third in the Navamsha, then that person produces Saturnian fruit as well. Oh wow, I'm so glad you could relate, Mia. What is apostasy? Apostasy. What is that? The abandonment or renunciation of a religious or political belief or principle. Okay, and your question is, would you think the third house Saturn can indicate apostasy from a religion that condemns apostates, causing both the chance of cowardice and courage? Okay, so Saturn in the third could definitely produce apostasy, which we're seeing is the abandonment of a religion. If that person's Saturn really thinks about it and really questions themselves and comes to the conclusion that no, this stuff does not make sense. Somebody who has Saturn in the third could definitely do that. And yeah, like I said, Saturn produces both cowardice and courage in the third. You're welcome, Captain. Okay, interesting. So you have Saturn the third. You say you're easily distracted and you're slow to understand concepts, and you also have don't know what a doubt is, and also have doubts any info, I think. Also have difficulty in memorizing things. Struggle in setting. Also, I prefer to be silent. All right, all right. Saturn third from Chandra is supposed to be the exact same thing as Saturn third from Lagna, because most astrologers say that like when you're reading a chart, you have to read it both from the ascendant and also from the Chandra chart because it yields the same results. And I have to say, I would have to agree. Okay, so you're also easily distracted, but you spend a lot of time doing math in your childhood. Okay, interesting. Saturn and Jupiter conjunct in the third house. Oh, that must be rather confusing. So you have one planet that's going all over the place, and another planet that really wants to stick to one thing. That's very, very interesting. But now we have to see which planet is stronger in that house because they're both fighting. Which planet are they conjunct? Which one has a lower degree? Or what are the degrees actually? What are the degrees? But one is in Aries. Ooh, so Saturn is very unhappy. Saturn would be very unhappy there. Oof. Man. Let me go over to Barbara Prijon. I really like this website, Barbara Prijon. I typed in third bhava, which is the third house. Here you get the names of the third house. You have this name over here, for example, which means brothers, brethren, fraternizing. You have this name, which means born with, which is the other word, which basically means sibling. Which this word krama, which means sequence, footstep, step by step, because the third house is the house of step by step thinking, sequential thinking. Parakrama, which means enterprise, marching forward, because, it is Vikrama, step, walk, way, course. So somebody who has Jupiter in the third has many courses, goes many places at the same time, whereas somebody who has Saturn in the third has only one path, one course, and that's why it relates a lot to concentration. This website is a very good resource. Have loved it for years. It has existed for years. Oh, you got a reading with me, Serendipity. Really? Oh, thank you for getting a reading with me. Jupiter has the lower degree, you say. All right, but are they conjuncts? And what are their degrees? Yeah, definitely. Oh, wow. You were held back a couple of grades. Yes, definitely Saturn would have a lot to do with this. If you have Rahu in the ninth, then you have Ketu in the third as well. So Saturn and Ketu in the third would definitely have a lot to do with being held back a few grades. Somebody who has Saturn in the third, Saturn in the ninth, Saturn in the first, those are combinations that could hold somebody back from like graduating and things like that. Definitely. Oh man, sorry to hear that. Well, Rahu really likes the instability of the third because Rahu does a lot, because Rahu itself isn't all over the place. Rahu is different. It's all over the place in a different way that Jupiter it is. But Rahu enjoys the third house. And you know something? Many planets, so when you have planets in the third house, many times it makes you an intelligent person. Especially if those planets are Rajasic, like Mercury and Venus. Those planets make you very, very intelligent. They make you very, very intelligent. You're good at many things. You're good at many things. All right, guys. I feel like we could end this stream unless you guys have any pressing questions. I'm just gonna wait like 2 minutes to see whether or not you guys have anything that you'd like to say extra on the matter. I feel like we've done all the speaking we could do. I don't even know what I'm doing. Thank you very much, Andrea. I really appreciate your compliment of what you're saying. Saturn conjunct Moon. I'm not sure if I'll ever do a deep dive on those aspects, Miguel. I feel like I'll just be sprinkling them in, to be honest. Because since I'm already going to be talking about Saturn, all the houses, I don't feel like I need to speak specifically about those aspects. All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for participating in the stream. Thank you guys always for participating in every single one of my streams. I love coming here and always finding people. Anyways, thank you guys so much again. And see you in my Saturn in the Fourth live stream that will happen, I don't know when. And also, eventually, I'm going to do a Saturn return video. And the Saturn return video, I feel like that's going to be a very interesting video.